All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's hard to compete with adequacy decision panels, but very welcome to those who chose this panel. I think it would be really fantastic and very informative. The panel is on transparency by design, and we will hear from the panelists policy considerations and also some technical and more down-to-earth solutions, how we could get there, but where we are exactly, and how we can position this discussion or this debate, if you wish, because I must say it's very new. It's also new to us as a Council of Europe. It's new to my fellow panelists. I think that I would propose to you to come from a bird view, from an overall perspective, which is not really strictly related to data protection or privacy, but more like the internet governance considerations, that if we agree that internet is a common public good, as it was intended to be, at least by Tim Berners-Lee, and I also believe in SURF, then obviously we need to make sure that it serves everybody equally, and it's safe at the same time, but accessible, transparent, and lives up to the challenges of today's society and today's changing world. So obviously, we all know that internet has rules, and internet governance has rules, but are those rules up to the challenges that we face? And I'm not even talking about geopolitical changes, but maybe just the technical advancements. If we look at the digital environment, well, it's pretty solid, I would say. So we can access to the internet, use digital services basically almost everywhere in the world. But what about the governance structures? Are they following this deployment of this wonderful new service that are enabled by this common public good, which is internet, right? Well, not so much, I believe. So if I have a cyber security issue, somebody stole some money from my bank account, I am calling my bank, right? I'm not calling the police. If I have to send data somewhere, I'm using a cloud service, very possibly, which most of the time I'm not very much aware of. And if I am going a little bit even further, even the controllers might not very much know all the details about this. And I can go on and on, finishing with maybe even enforcement issues. So could I enforce my rights, which we can agree that everybody should have the right to privacy on the internet, if we don't agree even with other rights, but we know about the other rights as well, but can I enforce them in an international, more global context? So we can conclude, I believe, that today the internet governance structures are a little bit like the paperwork looked like in the 70s, 80s, when our beautiful convention, which I am very happy to work for, the Convention 108, was drafted and was open to signature. It's slow, retroactive, and hard to enforce at scale. And obviously some say that, well, obviously it can result in a trust gap, in a lack of confidence, or at least in a fragmentation of this public common good or the quality of service that you can access to using this. Well, obviously, I mentioned Convention 108. It has very great standards, international standards that are recognized. but are they any good to improve this service or improve the use of this common good? I am full-time working on this with my colleagues and with 55 parties and observers on this, but obviously we have some challenges yet to overcome. So in that sense, we believe that these principles would be very nice to be seen in practice as well. And what can bring an international, internet-scale governance instrument, such as Convention 108, that can maybe be characterized as a code of conduct for fair processing and transparent processing and data transfers to a more operational, measurable, and usable real-time solution. Well, we can have technology that can help in that, right? Or we can have international technical standards that are also supporting these endeavors. So with this little introduction, I am really honored to be here at the CPDP and even more honored to be in the presence of my fellow panelists, Anna Brian Nogueras, who is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to privacy, Mark Lizard, who is the CEO of Canada Internet Laboratory, Jan Schoelerbeck, who is the vice convener of the ISO Working Group 5 and other interesting working groups as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and Peter Kitts, who is from the KPMG and has a very broad and very thorough overview and insight on how these things could work in an economic and business environment. Okay, so I would like to ask first Anna, where we are with internet structures, where the use of internet, with the principles that we all know, we promote them. We have at policy level for 43 years, last 44, 45 years even. But what's your take as a United Nations Special Rapporteur on the state of play, where we are coming from, and where we are going?
I take some minutes and go. Tell you my general opinion.
Yes.
Thank you, Peter. Colleagues, delegates, friends, it is an honor to address this panel today at CPDP 2026 as we convene in the Grand Hall. To discuss the mechanisms of operational transparency, as we assumed, we must begin by anchoring our technical discourse in its true purpose, that is to say, the protection and the promotion of human dignity in the digital age. In my capacity as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to privacy, I observe a world where the traditional concept of borders has been rendered almost obsolete by the relentless flow of data. We are no longer dealing with simple point-to-point transfers. We are operating within a borderless digital ecosystem characterized by multi-party chains of controllers, processors, and AI service layers that span the globe. In this environment, the right to privacy is not merely an isolated legal provision. It is a fundamental human right that serves as a gateway or as a prerequisite for the exercise of other essential freedoms, such as the freedom of expression, association, belief. However, this borderless nature presents a profound paradox. While technology transcends national boundaries, our human rights protections, they often remain fragmented, struggling to keep pace with the velocity and complexity of global data processing. So we see individuals and regulators frequently unable to determine until long after the processing has begun who is truly accountable for their data, what specific purpose is being pursued, or what legal authority is being relied upon. This lack of clarity, I think, creates a systemic vulnerability that needs a change. When personal data moves through opaque international channels without clear governance, the individual loses agency and the very fabric of trust that should underpin our digital society begins to fray. The trust as posture currently adopted by many actors is not only a technical risk, it is a human rights challenge. Therefore, the imperative is clear. We must move beyond. We came to terms on that term. We must move beyond a reactive stance and establish a proactive framework where transparency is not an afterthought, but a default operational requirement. This is the foundation upon which we must build a world where the protection of the right to privacy is as seamless and as global as the data flows it seeks in governance. Only by ensuring that governance models do not collide, but rather coalesce around shared human rights standards, can we truly safeguard the individual in this complex digital landscape. In the contemporary digital landscape, a standard interaction often begins with a demand, and the demand is identify yourself. Whether it is a login, a biometric scan, or the creation of a profile, as we spoke, the individual is required to surrender their digital identity as a prerequisite for service access. However, these digital ID demands are frequently introduced at the very beginning of an interaction. We are asked to engage in a leap of faith, providing our most personal identifiers based on abstract promises that the back-end processing is lawful and secure. Yet, as personal data moves through multi-party chains of controllers, processors, platforms, identity providers, AI service layers, the reality is much more opaque. In such complex environments, governance models often collide, leaving a trail of data that is difficult to track or verify. This model is not only a technical shortcoming, but a systemic failure in governance. It forces regulatory intervention to be reactive, waiting for a breach or a complaint to investigate what happened long after the fact. So to move forward, we must deconstruct this paradigm. We must define a new standard of transparency that specifies exactly what must be inspectable before identification is demanded and before any transfer occurs. By embedding transparency and governance up front, we enable regulatory intervention to become proactive instead of reactive. By requiring evidence artifacts that make oversight scalable, we can transition from a model of blind trust to one of verifiable accountability. As we have deconstructed the inherent risks of the trust us paradigm, the question that naturally arises is, upon what foundation do we build a better alternative? To address the systemic vulnerabilities created when different governance models collide across digital borders, we need a robust, internationally recognized legal framework. We propose, that's what we have been speaking about, a practical approach that is firmly grounded in Council of Europe Convention 108. In the actual fragmented landscape, the need for a universally understood legal baseline appears as paramount. Convention 108 Plus serves as this exact legal cornerstone. It provides the necessary normative foundation to ensure that fundamental human rights, particularly the right to privacy, are not lost in translation or diluted as data crosses jurisdictional lines. by relying on Convention 108+, we are not merely debating abstract principles. We are setting the stage to introduce a common structure for implementing a transparent by default code of practice for transfers and a digital identification management. The modernized convention empowers us to demand that accountability is a structural prerequisite, not an afterthought. It provides the explicit legal mandate to rigorously define what must be inspectable before digital identification is demanded and before any cross-border transfer occurs. Convention 108+ gives us the normative weight to challenge and change this unacceptable status quo. Furthermore, anchoring our operational transparency strategies in Convention 108+, there is a catalyst for modern digital governance, for risk and for compliance. Embedding transparency and governance upfront enables regulatory intervention to shift fundamentally, following it to become proactive instead of reactive. By establishing this legal cornerstone, we open up multilateral capacities for governance to enable cross-border flows for a Commonwealth-sized market. Ultimately, Convention 108+ bridges the gap between high-level human rights imperatives and the scalable operational standards required to protect privacy in our hyper-connected world. Now, going from principles to practices, having established Convention 108 as our indispensable legal cornerstone, we must now confront the defining challenge of our era. How do we translate these profound legal principles into tangible operational reality? Legal text, no matter how rigorously drafted it might be, it cannot execute code or parse data packets on its own. It requires technical translation to be effective on the ground. This brings us to the core of our discussion today. We are proposing a practical operational transparency code of practice approach. This approach is fundamentally grounded in the rights established by Convention 108+ and is actively being operationalized through IEC Working Group 5 standardization work. Our primary aim is to introduce a common structure for implementing a transparency by default code of practice for transfers and a digital identification management. To achieve this, we must shift the timeline of compliance. We must definitely define what must be inspectable before identification is demanded and before transfer occurs. To bridge this gap between legal requirement and technical execution, the IEC Working Group 5 standardization work focuses on the creation and implementation of specific evidence artifacts. These artifacts are designed to capture and communicate the governance framework attached to a data flow. By attaching standardized, verifiable evidence to data transfers, we eliminate the blind spots where individuals and regulators often cannot determine who is accountable, what purpose is pursued, what authority justification is relied on, and what onward disclosures occur until long after processing is underway. The implications of this shift for modern digital governance risk and compliance are profound. When we effectively embed transparency and governance up front, it entirely transforms the role of DPAs. It enables regulatory intervention to become proactive instead of reactive. Regulators will no longer be relegated strictly to the role of digital archaeologists investigating breaches after the damage is done. Instead, they will be equipped to monitor the structural integrity of data processing frameworks in real time. This seamless integration of legal principles and technical standards opens up multilateral capacities for governance. It provides the necessary trust infrastructure to securely enable cross-border flows for a Commonwealth-sized market. By turning operational transparency from an aspiration into an ISO-backed reality, we provide that robust privacy protection and seamless global digital innovation are not mutually exclusive. They are deeply interdependent. Now, a couple of closing remarks. As we finish this presentation, I want to leave you with a clear vision of the future we are striving to build. We have discussed the urgent need to move away from the blind trust us posture and recognize that cross-border transfers are the critical junctures where different governance models collide. By grounding our approach in Convention 108+ and operationalizing it through ISO IEC Working Group 5, standardizing work, we are actively defining what must be inspectable before identification is demanded and before transfer occurs. This shift is not merely a technical adjustment, it is a fundamental transformation of modern digital governance, of the risk and of compliance. For far too long, the protection of the right to privacy has been a deeply reactive endeavor, leaving authorities to clean up after data has already been misused. However, when we embed transparency and governance up front, it enables regulatory intervention to become proactive. This means empowering individuals and data protection authorities with the necessary evidence artifacts that make oversight truly scalable. Our shared aim is to introduce a common structure for implementing a transparency by default code of practice for transfers and a digital identification management. I call upon the global community, regulators, technologists, and civil society to champion this operational transparency. We must demand that digital systems are architected to prove their compliance and accountability at the very first point of interaction, not after the data is already flowing through opaque multi-party chains. Adopting this proactive stance does not hinder technological progress. On the contrary, it opens up multilateral capacities for governance to enable cross-border flows for a Commonwealth-sized market. It provides the trust and legal certainty required for a thriving global digital economy. In my case as the UN Special Rapporteur, I firmly believe that human rights and digital innovation must advance in tandem. So let us, I invite you, to commit to building a digital ecosystem where privacy is the default, where transparency is fully operationalized, and where human dignity remains the indisputable center of our shared future. Thank you.
Thank you, so much, Anna. Thank you. So very enlightening and encouraging. Turning to Mark, coming from the policy perspective, so in your work around operational transparency, evidence artifacts, so what are your takes on all this, what we have been discussing?
Thank you, and thanks a lot. It's an honor to be here, coming all the way from Canada. So my name is Mark Lazar. I've spent my career focused on surveillance and consent and digital identity. And for the last 15 years, I've been working on a consent record information structure, which is a bit different than the, I guess, digital ID today. And really, I've been looking at this challenge. So, you know, our data is being taken from us before we have a chance to see who's taking it. So when we go online, we don't have consent or permission, and we don't know who is taking our data first. So this makes it really very much unfair, and it causes a lot of harm. So this has been a big challenge, and I think this is a root challenge for everyone here and the conference. So, but what's really interesting is this isn't a new problem. So you know, we have these megacorps, which are really like data barons and data brokers, and a a long time ago, I think in 1215, there was something called the Magna Carta, and I think this has really developed into the 108 plus that we have today. And that was really good because the same rules applied to everyone, including kings, but it really didn't protect people. So the barons, the land barons, they were taking all of the land, and nobody was secure. So they had a really big challenge there. So in 1217, something called the Forest Charter was enacted, and the Forest Charter made it required that the land barons put a sign up, a forest sign, to say what is private property and what isn't. And that enabled people to reclaim their rights to the land, and it really opened up governance for common spaces. So the governance of common spaces really, I think, in modern history started then. But this wasn't the only time this happened. We had the robber barons at the late 1800s, and the robber barons basically would take your money in a bank and they would gamble it, and it ended up in the Great Depression. And so there wasn't any, they needed more transparency. So not only how much money you have in the bank, but where that money or the bank is spending money. So this inspired the Security and Exchange Commission officers and the banking monitoring, and it made the invisible visible and governable. So now we have the data barons. So we have a very similar problem as in the 1800s, and this is the issue now, is that we don't see before we go online who's taking our data, where are they located, what authority are they processing our data under. So really, the data barons are able to get away with this lack of transparency because of a lack of standards, and under the rubric of digital identity. And so this is fundamentally unfair, but it's not required. We can very easily require that the controller is made transparent first, so we can see who is taking our data, but also we can get a notice saying that your data is going to be transferred across borders, and what the risks are. So maybe there's surveillance, so your rights are derogated, and you can choose to go, okay, transfer my data across borders, I want to participate in this service. And then people have the right or the ability to control data themselves and secure themselves. So this is a key point to be made, is that we can reverse the technology of digital identity and really just make transparent the controllers. And the EU AI Act is requiring now a registry, and these are going to be made public. I think August 3rd is the day, which makes it now possible for us to switch the surveillance to surveillance, so we can all see the companies watching us. And it's not just us being exposed real time for advertising, but transparency becomes a two-way street. And this is what starts making it operational. And this is where international standards come into play. And the standard we were working on from ISO became free and open access last year. So now the infrastructure finally, after a very long time, is there. So yeah, the solution, what's really amazing about Convention 108 Plus is that it has the principle of proportionality. So really what we're talking about is proportionate and reciprocal transparency. So whatever the technology is, you would have the equivalent transparency artifacts. And this simple rule, I think, makes it transparent for everyone. So this is a great time because up until now, there hasn't been that infrastructure to even make this possible. So.
Right, thank you so much. Transitioning more to the business community or industrial perspective. Peter, I think you are the best placed person on the panel to enlighten us what the business operators, business actors, industrial operators would, how would they see transparency? How would they see operational transparency? And what is their relationship towards this principle, whether if it's more like a compliance issue or just something foundational. And of course, if you have some thoughts about standards and other technical measures to facilitate compliance and then these issues.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And also thank you for having me. My name is Peter. I'm heading the tech law and privacy team within KPMG, not within KPMG law, but in advisory, because I think too long the law was determining what business should do. And actually, I think that business and organizations, the law should help business and organizations to help them with their goals, because in the end, we need business organizations to help society and the economy. So we are in the intersection of law and technology, and to my strong belief, I think standards are great and standards are terrible. So there are so many standards, national standards, international standards, EU standards, that companies do not really understand why are they doing that? Why should I adhere to that? So I was luckily involved in the building of the Bluetooth standard. And I think that is a great example of a really good working standard in practice, really solving a problem. It was after video with VHS, Betamax, C2000. I see a lot of young people in the room, so they do not know all those technologies. But not the superior technology won the race of the best video, because that was the only technology that let some content on the video where others were not doing that. So it's not always that you have, and after that, tech companies, competitors, were working together in the field of short-circuit wireless communication. Everybody thought, why, if we can get rid of all these cables and things, and we can have like devices connected to each other without any links or physical stuff, it's beneficial for everybody. So all these people worked together on the standard, a technical standard, and it's called Bluetooth. And Bluetooth is something that has legal implications. There's a patent around it. There were investments. There need to be return on investment, but there's also an economic incentive to adhere to that standard. And you have 4 roles: founders, contributors, adopters, and sponsors. And I think when you want a standard really want to work and re-engineer the internet, if you wish, you should really think there's a benefit for everybody, also from business. I work for big tech companies, I work for small tech companies, I work for governments. Everybody wants to do the good thing, also in the field of transparency. But there has to be something in it for everybody. And that's what we saw with Bluetooth. You have like organizations that want to adopt the standard, but do not necessarily want to contribute to a standard. While other organizations say, I really want to make my work building out this standard, technical, functional, organizational measures, make it sustainable towards the future. So my strong point here is that if you work on a standard, look into the how. How is this going to function in the world? And that we not get discussions, but that we have, according to the Rose of Larry, we are above together, right above something, working on the same thing. And I see a lot of organizations, very commercial organizations and not-for-profit organizations working together on standards, solving problems. And I strongly see that the problem that the internet, the governance is broke. It doesn't work. It is not clear, and transparency is the basis. The identification of the controllers and also identification of the people who are on the internet. And I think it solves a lot of economic problems. It's a lot of political problems, cultural problems. It can help a lot. So it's like the metaphor of building a house. I think the standard, what happens in the world with democracies and autocracies, the standard is the foundation of the house. So a standard, this standard we're talking about today is really foundational. And we are here together. We should make sure that everybody is involved in making this standard work. Because if it doesn't work, it doesn't make any sense to do anything about it. So we have to, keeping the end in mind, Stephen Covey said it, how are we going to make this world? How are we going to land this plane? And I'm very happy to think about it, but not alone, do it together, come up with ideas to make it happen.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Turning to Jan, how does it, all of this speaking to you? So policy level, business perspectives, some philosophical insights as well, historical background. So what do you do at ISO, more specifically?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's been my 20th CPDP, I think, or it is the 20th CPDP, and I've been here many, many times, and it's an honor to sit here now. And I could very much resonate with what Peter to my left has said here. It reminded me somewhat of the famous XKCD 925. There's a lot of numbers in standards, but there's also a lot of numbers in some of these comics where people say, oh, shoot, we have these 13 competing standards. We should come up with one standard that encompasses them all. And next picture is, now we have 14 competing standards, right? Happens all the time. Standardization can be frustrating, but I'm very happy to have a couple of experts here in the room that have been working with us in ISO on standards. And when I talk about ISO, you already mentioned SC27, Working Group 5 in ISO IEC, which is concerned with privacy technologies and identity management. The convener, Kai Rannenberg, couldn't be here today. He sends his apologies. I'm stepping in. I'm working there as his vice convener for the last couple of years. Your convener support roles change. And I also chair a separate committee that's on privacy by design for consumer goods. So I work a lot in that field, although I'm another lawyer on the panel. I'm also interested in this mix of technology and legal. Now, I brought you some transparency technology. If you have arrived from the airport with the train this morning, you probably received one of those. It's a receipt, and it tells you how much you paid for your ticket, and you can put it away. You know it's going to be $11.60. And this has been well established. And in marketplaces, if you pay for something, you can get these things. Even more, usually people tell you in advance how much you ought to pay. Well, not so much on the internet. We all agree that data is not the not-so-new oil, but it's a currency. And consumers are increasingly in the situation that they don't know in advance what they pay with their data. They don't even know afterwards what they paid. So there is a clear gap and a lack. And in consumer protection, we call that a problem. And in behavioral economics, we call that a distorted market. And from the perspective of information asymmetry, it's called a lemon market. It's failing on all levels. Now, this is where the work of Mark and others comes in, because they provided a number of standards that actually provide a receipt for you and a practice, a notice format that provides you in a structured way in advance what you ought to pay in data, what's going to happen with your data. And that's the innovation that's in there. Now, that's fine. We have a standard out there. How is it going to be adopted in the market? Well, I'm not sure whether market forces are going to be enough to actually do that, because several reasons. First of all, people are not used to paying with their data. It doesn't feel like paying with the data. From an economic perspective, we've understood that effectively you get free service because you're providing data to the service providers. So there is this transactional equality, but for the consumers, it's often not clear because, well, data is a dime a dozen. I can give it away here, I can give it away there, so you don't lose anything. At least you don't have a feeling of losing anything, right? So, and on the other side of the market, the entities that actually want to acquire data, they're not very interested in providing transparency. That might shy you away from using their service and providing the information they're so eager to have. So turning this around is a necessity. And I like the term transparency by default very much. It relates very well to what we discussed in Europe under data protection by default. And it's kind of the next step. Now, the fun part is, how does that relate to Convention 108, 108 plus, and other mechanisms? We just saw that markets don't have the driver for that. And that's where regulators come into place. Now, we all remember, no, maybe not all of us, but some of us may remember a famous speech in Davos 30 years ago by John Perry Barlow. he essentially said, governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, leave us alone. That was the Declaration of Independence on the internet. And that was kind of the spirit back then, and some of us may have resonated with that. It went on with the former IETF chair saying, we reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus and running code. And that's much what we do in standards. However, I would, and I have said before, and a long time ago, said before that the Declaration of the Independence of the Internet is deprecated. We long have understood that the Internet is not a separate world, and John Perry Barlow probably would agree if he were still alive. So we cannot just say, here's the Internet, and that is self-regulated, and then there's the real world. That's long gone, right? And the GDPR addresses that to a large extent. A lot of regulation is coming out. The AI Act is focused on that. The DSA, many others, and that's a good thing. But when we're looking at standards, there's sometimes this missing link. Market is not driving it, so what could? Regulation could. And since the internet is global, we need a global mechanism, which we're lacking on the regulatory side, except for Council of Europe. Council of Europe is the only entity that I'm aware of that actually has broader conventions of at least a large number of countries that agree on rules in that area. And Convention 108, which also already has, 45 years is it? Wow. Is a prime example of the foresight that the Council of Europe had in that regard. I'm very happy to see that 108 Plus is even taking it a step further. And if that would be a mechanism where we could fill that gap and fill that missing link by using the mechanisms in 108 Plus to allow for standards such as the ones that Mark promoted here, then that would be a great thing. There are several mechanisms in the new 108 Plus that would actually allow for that. There's Article 23, which allows for the Convention Committee to provide recommendations, opinions, but even more strongly, it can provide models of standardized safeguards, as it's named, and it's a special mechanism from Article 14, which specifically speaks to that topic. So here could be the gap where the Convention Committee that could point to international standards and then make them, through a transition period, more and more the standard that we all apply and the regulatory driver. And I'm very much looking forward to discussing that idea with you. I think it's a great opportunity indeed, and it could really change something. And by the way, you're all invited to contribute to that discussion. You can become members of the committees I've just mentioned. Just approach me afterwards. There's several opportunities to get involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Approved standardized contractual clauses, approved standards, and code of conducts is definitely something I will very much like to bring back to the committee for consideration. Thank you for raising this issues. Anna, coming back to you, well, you heard all the speakers. What do you think? Well, you heard the evidence and the adoption angles. Does transparency at runtime sounds like a kind of multilateral mechanism that can gain legitimacy? Do you see any potential in the UN structure for that, and how this can be maybe translated in a more global initiative?
It's on. Yes, I see it. I think that there are certain elements that need to be inspected, and that we can introduce what can be seen in certain regulations, like the right to information. That is to say, information about the sender, the receiver, the data subject, or the purpose of the transaction. And with those elements, you can put that in the transaction using technical elements that in a way that it's not so aggressive as to give it on a first basis.
Thank you so much. Peter, you mentioned that standards are good, but not so much for the time being. So what will be your recommendations? What kind of political will or market pressure would need to be, or why not incentives could be put in place in order to steer the discussions or reflections also in the business community towards this very great idea that I really enjoy listening to, that we could have something workable here?
Yeah, it also always starts with the why. Yeah? What are you trying to achieve? We want to have prosperity, a safe environment in the countries of the, let's start with the European countries. How to achieve that, and then we have to have things like level playing fields. And new businesses should occur, not only the bigger ones should stay here and survive. So the standard should also help new businesses and should not be a too big barrier to entrance to the market. So in there the DSA, DMA can help to have fair access to technology. Things like copyright protected or patent protected can be a burden. So we should work with open source, open standards in the whole ecosystem of this. And what I said, transparency should be easy and good to follow. And as I'm also from audit firms, auditors and also the Big Four, but also other audit firms can help to set the standard. What is the standard? And we saw things terribly go wrong with the CSRD, CSDDD, because it was not clear for auditors what to audit, and to how to realize ESG goals. All kinds of standards and audit requirements were asked for, but it could not be adhered to. So then it becomes a mess. So you should make it clear, where's the standard for, what are we trying to solve here, how does it work, and that everybody can contribute in a certain role. So I'm a strong believer that you should not impose every requirement to everyone at the same time, but see what is your role in this and how can you grow. And we can also a grow model, that if you have a certain threshold of turnover, you have more requirements than maybe when you're a bit smaller. Also depending on for what kind of data are we talking about. Are we talking about medical data or are we talking about a nail company? Yeah? That are also elements to make the adherence of a standard and the sustainable adherence is a success. And what, from my perspective, what clients really want, they want to, from audit as an exception to audit as a routine, and they want to work from compliance as a legal event to compliance as an operational state. And that's what we are helping clients every day to really don't see compliance as a burden, but see it as just a part of you doing your business, like a healthy compliance culture, you want to have a healthy body as a person. You should also have a healthy organization, and working standards are part of that. And it can be achieved by a lot of ways, what I said. But keep everybody involved in the ecosystem and also in the company, that it really works as a synergetic community.
Yeah, very good points. Specialized standards, I like them. Jan, I'm turning to you, and also linking up maybe with this idea of we have to know who the standards are for. So how do you see authority and scale emerging over the next few years when AI and identification markets are gaining really center stage in global in global economies and global interactions?
So yeah, there's this identity element in there, certainly. So we've been focusing very much on this topic of allowing for more transparency. And in that regard, we also need to know when does that actually apply. And often when we talk about identification, people associate the situation that you know somebody by name. But that's not what identification is, at least not under the definition within ISO, at least not under the definitions that would be applicable. Similarly, when we apply the term of personal identifiable information, PII, or personal data in the EU. This is much broader concept of identification. And identification exists when you visit a website for a second time and it recognizes you because it put a cookie on your computer or fingerprints your browser. That's already identification. That's the situation when we need that type of transparency. Now I want to come back to Peter on a couple of topics, and I very much agree with the approach. I think the former data protection agency, Peter Shar, once said, it's not the compliance that's expensive, it's the processing that's expensive. If you want to do something that may harm people, you got to put the money on the table. Although, and I very much, and that's also something we have approached in our legal practice a lot, is that the complexity of regulatory environments and requirements should correlate to the size of the company. That's essentially what you said. Although in this regard, I'm slightly deviating from that scheme. I think it should escalate with the risk associated to the processing. If I'm a small company, today I have AI at my hands, I can escalate very quickly. I can eventually have very risky data at my hand, and I should be then complying with a high level of standards in that regard too, even if I don't have a lot of money. Because that's what we're focusing on, that's what Anna pointed out. We're trying to protect human rights, human dignity here, and it mustn't depend on the size of the company whether your rights are protected better or worse.
Thank you so much. Mark.
Yeah, but this is, sorry to say, but this is theory against practice. We have a group that focuses on people who are really want to innovate and doing good things, specifically in the medical sector. There's a lot of data available. People can be cured sooner. Things can be proactive scanned and stuff like that. With the MDR and all these thousands of standards, there is no any incentive for these companies to go any further because they cannot manage all these standards. They cannot adhere to it. So if we really want to put our money where our mouth is and come up with a strong, vivid, innovative society in Europe, we have to find a way how also we engage young people coming from the universities to start businesses, making business in this difficult world. And I really help a lot of people with compliance with the MDR, medical device regulation, with a lot of standards in the law already. It is a nightmare. How can you have an ISMS, a QMS, and all these things when you don't even have enough money to see the next day and pay your personnel? So I'm, again, strong believer of a standard, but the standard should be open for everybody and can be followed. That specifically these young, energetic people, but that we also keep the bright minds in other countries than the big tech countries that we have now in the world. So I really think that the standard should also be a stimuli to make it available for more people. So I'm not against your point, but I really think we should take that into account.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, regulatory fatigue is something we feel all, I believe. So, but all right, Mark, hearing also Peter, a very good point. How does this turn into code of practice without being, causing too much annoyance, too much fatigue, too much restriction, young generation, new people wanting to launch themselves into new things, creating new ideas, contributing to development. So how do you see these things?
Thanks. So, first of all, the concept of a receipt. The receipt is the oldest form of human writing that we have. So it's a very, very old, ancient trust tool, and it's evolved human society over time, and it's turned into currency, commercial paper, and there was security with ID on the paper, and it's in the medieval times they used to put gold in a cart, and they send gold between Florence and Paris, and it was very inefficient. It got robbed all the time, And then finally, they notarized a piece of paper, and you said, okay, take this to the bank over there. And it just saved a lot of money in efficiency. So we're talking like an enormous scale. Right now, you need to give your data away for it to be protected, to get access to rights. And this is just archaic. So, when we talk about not having to have your data protected where you have rights, we're talking a whole new scale of economic viability. And in particular, right now there's 33 countries that are signed up to the Convention One Way Plus, and when it gets to 38, it becomes enforceable. So we're talking about this regulation opening a market for 2.5 billion people, and taking it away from a few data barons that are really killing the market, and they're killing the use of this great technology. I think AI has a lot of promise, but not when your data is being extracted and owned by another company. I mean, it's like currently AI is a toy because you can't guarantee where the data come from. It's not insurable, and there's a lot of very big issues with that. So if you flip this around, and you get a receipt when you engage with a controller, you now have your own record of your digital relationship. So if you had a record of all your digital relationships, you have an immense amount of intelligence at your fingertips, and you don't need the third parties. So really what we're talking about is a higher level of assurance, but people can go online and be anonymous. So we're not exposed. We don't need our data protected. And I think this has immense benefits, but there's a lot of misinformation out there right now. So it's very, very difficult. Yeah, I have a couple of points just to say that this isn't no longer what do we do about this. This is about how are we going to do it, and it's fundamentally, it's a multi-stakeholder problem. So we need countries to be involved. The member states need to support this, and really this. In all of the laws, transparency or notice is required. So if you look at any law and you just do a search for notice, it'll come up, and there's requirements. So we're really just asking regulators to enforce the law, not make new ones, right? So, there's a lot of behaviors that are going on right now, and there's no response. So this is, disheartening. But I think really what it's showing is that we need to give regulators tools to enable enforcement capacity to scale as well. And I think this is what these standards can do. So, it's a big turning point.
Yeah, thank you so much. So at this point, I would like to open up for questions from the floor. We have 10 minutes. This is a very new, but I think engaging topic. So anyone who wants to ask question to the panelists, that's the right time. Lady in front.
Yes, thank you. My name is Viara. I'm with the European Ethereum Institute. So what we do is we represent Ethereum and the Ethereum ecosystem, and this has been an amazing discussion because there are a lot of overlaps with things that we also focus on, particularly the public good element, also how we can ensure that responsibility is really proportionately attributed. Also topics around digital identity and all those things. So I'm curious to learn if you're also thinking about public permissionless blockchains when you're discussing and ideating on those topics around broader topics of the internet. But I would say it's not only the internet. Web 2, as we know it, that is affected, but it's also the Web 3 space that is affected. So I think it's also important to have this discussion.
Right. Anyone from the panel would like to reply or?
So the concept of a ledger is not a new concept, and to have something that's immutable, we have in society, we have notaries, we have the legal social infrastructure already embedded in society to enable scale, and I think a receipt is a token. So if you look at the oldest form of writing, it's about this big, and it's thousands of years old. And it's a token, right? And it enabled ancient trust technology. So this is really the advanced part. When you look at Ethereum and you look at the blockchain, and we're talking about the evolution of that. So what we're really talking, which is different. We're talking about law to code, not code to law. So, and it's really about common sense. Fundamentally, being transparent so we can consent. Because if you don't know where your data is going and you have all these trackers, and then you click I agree to something called a cookie, which is really a receipt, then it's not possible to consent if your data is being taken. So the same thing is the liability is trapped. And the opportunity with Ethereum is, the risk mitigation and the, dynamic transfers using standards, dynamic security and dynamic transparency, really reduces risk and enables a lot of innovation. And this is the pattern throughout history when, transparency started governing, all of a sudden economics boomed. And, I think right now, I think everybody would agree, we need an international mechanism for this and to stop the fragmentation. I think Ethereum is definitely, one of the great opportunities for this future space.
All right. Any other question from the audience? Yes.
Hello, thank you for the panel. I'm a student of the Masters of Law program at Leiden University, and something that I've been thinking about is about how fairness essentially must be treated as transparency must be treated as demonstrable fairness. And I know that kind of is an academic argument that transparency and fairness go hand in hand. And if we're kind of looking at the idea of the incoming Digital Fairness Act and what digital fairness must look like, transparency is an important component of that about when it comes to data, and transparency by default as well. But more importantly, what I'm thinking about essentially is how if information is transparent, but it's not understandable or explainable to a user, from like a consumer perspective, how would fairness and transparency by default kind of come together?
Yeah, anyone from the panel?
Yeah, love that. It really is exactly kind of the same way of thinking that I was alluding to early on when I said we're having failed markets, and that's essentially unfair, right? So it's kind of the same concept. I just made it on the market with the mechanism, or I explained it with the mechanism of the market, but you could definitely go broader and allude to fairness. Now, how do you do that, and how do you resolve that? Well, the issue with current transparency mechanisms is that you don't have the providers or the processors or controllers of data abide to certain standards. So consumers cannot compare these privacy policies. You don't know where to look. You don't know whether it's complete. That's all not clear. So that's why that kind of market is failing, because there is no transparency. They can write things there. Nobody's going to read them unless he's a data protection lawyer and stupid enough to do these things like me. But in the future, hopefully, we'll be in a situation where you open these things up and they'll be as easy to read as the receipt I received from the Belgium train system today.
All right. Mark, you want to add on?
I could just jump on that. So a standard record can be rendered, right? So before we even really care who the controller is, or, we want to know what the authority is, and if our data is going to be, what's the scope of disclosure? So I think the missing phrase that's very powerful is that it's about the scope of disclosure from a human perspective, not proximity from a technical perspective. So we know there's a massive semantic battle going around at this moment over these concepts. So when the scope of disclosure is not what is expected, and it's going across borders, which is not what we're expected, we need to have a notice. If we don't, it's not fair. And if it's not, if we don't have that notice and it's not fair, then it's harmful. And now we're seeing, decades of harm-based processes having massive impact on society. And this is a simple solution in the past, but it's being made extra complicated. So ultimately, if a service has lots of surveillance, then there should be lots of notice. But the point really is it's not required to have lots of surveillance. A service could be architected where you could have seamless and very limited amount of notice because it is what you expect it to be. And what's happening is these tech companies are getting away with making a lot of stuff that does things that you don't expect with your data. So this is where the governance should come in. Like, I've heard this week ChatGPT is starting a health service. I'm like, so how is that legal? Meta and Facebook taking people's data to another country, your children's data, making a profile and then selling it, where's the governance saying, well, no, this is our citizens' data. You can't treat it like that. Be transparent up front. Who are these people, companies looking at these profiles? Well, the individual should have a notice when that happens and control over their own social profile. I mean, this is a fundamental, and it seems very common sense, but there's very little dialogue about this. And I think it's about having a common platform for us to stand together.
All right. Any other question from the audience? Okay. Gentleman in the front.
Hi, thank you for the panel. I'm Harsh. I'm also an editor of 27560, which is the consent record standard. One of the challenges is that the law doesn't want to make it easy. It's all about compliance, and in Europe we see compliance is a burden, whereas transparency is a burden. So I don't see the law immediately going, yeah, we need to do this effectively. So how do we address this challenge of lawmakers not listening to problems like this and preferring less burden, which is less compliance somehow?
Right, anyone?
Okay, Harsh, thank you for that question. Perfect. And it much relates to what Peter said earlier about these costs, right? Why don't the lawmakers do that? I think sometimes they just don't understand. It's as simple as that. I just talked to a colleague that works for the European Parliament on data protection issues and on the omnibus, and with all due respect, he knows his stuff, but going as deep as our consent record standard is something lawmakers don't want to do, and for good reasons. And the old adagio goes, regulation should be technology neutral, and standards should be policy neutral. Spoiler, it's not working that way. We have these overlaps. We have to acknowledge that. But what can drive it actually is that good standards will actually lower compliance costs. It will make it possible to automate parts of the processes. It will reduce your legal risks fundamentally. So there are these types of drivers, but we're currently lacking the enabler, I guess. And this is where maybe Convention 108 plus and Article 14 specifically comes into play.
I'm going to have to jump on that too. So if we really, it's not about new law. It's about regulators enforcing or implementing the existing law. So right now, if you go online, all these notices that you see are really referential to something called a privacy policy, which really is just implementing a contract. You don't actually get immediate access to your rights or any rights controls. And what we're talking about here is a Convention 108 plus international privacy policy. So it's independent of the companies. So we can all see what the company's doing, not be dependent on some black box policy that doesn't implement the law or give anyone access to rights. So, this terms and condition privacy policy checkbox thing has not evolved for 20 years, right? So we're using the same mechanism. Meanwhile, they're now able to just off an identifier do something called identity resolution and market you around the world real time. So we have to go outside of this context and try to say I object, when really we should be able to object real time. So this is just fundamental, and I think regulators really need to look at it from the perspective that saying no, privacy policy is not good enough. You need to conform to the international standard.
All right, we have very little time left. Can I ask you to have one sentence as a closing remark or wish? What do you wish to happen on this issue in the near future?
Well, being first of all a European and secondly a lawyer, I think, not to you, we should not complain about the overload of regulations. It's the why are we doing this? Why are we trying to solve? And we developed the concept, document and control once, comply with many. And you can use a standard perfectly for that. ISO 27001, you can link to multiple laws, AI Act, Data Act, restrictions, identity, access management. So actually it can help incumbent companies and new companies to really be effective and efficient doing where the laws are about to, safeguard our fundamental rights, have a fair economy, not where the winner takes it all, but it really can help. So we should not look at what we have and complain about the overload of regulation, but how are we going to make use of it? And technology can help if it's done in a right way. And standards are just in the middle of that, between the legal concepts, principle-based, rule-based, and the operations. And how you fill in the standards for yourself, it's about the structure, the culture, and the size of your organization. But the standards really can help to solve a lot of problems if you do it right. But then the basic of the standard had to be adhered by everybody and see that it has, that it can help your company or your organization. So I love standards.
Finally.
Glad to hear that. Now, in my closing, I would like to highlight that it may have sounded like we were already there. No, we're just starting. I mean, that whatever mechanism from 108 plus is eventually going to evolve, that's going to be a long, tough ride, I'm sure. And there are standards in place in our working groups, but there certainly is some room for improvement. There's very important work in W3C as well, the privacy vocabulary. Thank you, Harsh. You're doing an excellent job there. But those standards work well, the more people contribute and the more stakeholders are involved.
Mark.
Yes, so I mean, that's a really good point. Machine readable privacy. So right now we're getting all this text and, from the dark ages. And what Jan just mentioned is, the W3C data privacy vocabulary is really mature now. And it's able to basically use a common language that's machine readable, which means it's really interoperable. And the other thing is that notice and transparency is the tool that makes things interoperable. This is what we're talking about, interoperability, is a common record for transparency over a controller. And what's most significant with these open and free to access standards is that we're talking about pretty much free implementation. You're talking about enhancing a notice with standards. So, any sign, CCTV sign, or any notice can easily be updated, but if we use the Convention 108 Plus, it doesn't have to be a long, hard road. We can give everybody the ability to make their own receipts independent of a company, and then the company has to deal with that. We have our evidence, and they're doing misbehavior. We don't need the permission of companies or services in order to implement standards for people. And I think that's a key point, is that this doesn't have to be a big challenge.
Right. Anna, your wish?
Just towards Peter, because I would like to bring you back to the macro idea. And so I would like to invite you to work, of course, on standards, on Convention 108, on transparency by default, but never to forget that we need to have a bigger eye, not only our countries, but all the world. Because there are lots of scenarios that are very, very different, and we need to take them all into account, have them all in agenda, have them all on our table. Maybe we are not going to be able to see results, but let's feel like we are going to work at it as far as we can.
All right, thank you so much. It has been a terrific panel. Thank you so much for that. I think it's a great example how a high-level international convention, which all the article says a party shall do this and that, can be transformed into a very lively, very interactive, engaging discussion also on technical norms and standards. So I really would like to thank Peter, Jan, Mark, Anna. It was a pleasure and an honor being on this panel with you. I think that hope that we can remember this as a great start for something new, something better on the internet. I thank the CPDP for having us here and allowing this interaction, and having Convention 108 Plus and other important legislation norm standards transformed into a machine readable format. Thank you so much. Have
Thanks
a good
to you,
lunch.
Peter.